I'll start by introducing myself, and then each of the panel members can introduce themselves as well. So I'm Violet Owen, I'm a Senior Research Associate at Lancaster University, and I'm going to be the respondent to the panel today. Tom?
I'm Tom Pope, Director of the Making Rooms, a creative hub in Blackburn, with a background in education.
I'm Guy. I am an industrial designer. I've worked at Pentagram for just over 5 years. Now I am building a company in material regeneration and advanced recycling, and doing other kind of design work mostly in kind of technology-related projects.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Mike Stead. I'm a lecturer in Sustainable Design Futures at Lancaster University down the road in the School of Design. So my work looks at circular economy, net zero, particularly around digital technologies and how technologies are changing things and their good and bad impacts.
I'm Patrick. I don't know exactly how I fit in here. I feel completely inadequate, surrounded by experts in the field. But I'm based in Berlin, so I'm a Scouser. That's the real reason I'm here. I wanted to come here and congratulate.
You didn't sound like a Scouser.
Yeah, I can do it. Do you want it in Scouse? Or do you want it I moved away from the north a long, long time ago. And I did 20 years in Barcelona, worked on the Olympic Games. Before opened a studio, blah, 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 worked commercially, employed 8, 9 people. The studio was at its biggest, as it were. And 15 years ago, I moved to Berlin, Germany. And since then, I've been running my own practice. I'm an author, I've got 2 or 3 books out. And I'm also an educator in the south of Germany, in a little town called Stuttgart. And yeah, there you go, that's it. Thank you. Very nice to be here.
So you are an expert.
I'm
Some expertise.
I think you're right where you need to be.
Great. So the panel's been asked today to come together to talk about the value of design in the fight for climate change. So we're going to talk around some themes and topics. It's going to be quite casual, so we encourage anyone from I say audience, but any friend who kind of people watching us to just join in. If you've got things you'd like to say, feel free to interject, put your hand up, however formal or casual you want it to be. But we'd love to hear from you guys as well. So one of the topics that we've had a chat beforehand. So one of the topics that's come up quite a lot when we're thinking about the role of design in the fight for climate change is to do with education. And I think all of us in different ways were involved in some sort of education around sustainability, around climate change. So it might be interesting if we start that as our opening topic. For example, I know, Tom, you've been doing lots of work to do with education of repair practices within your work in making rooms. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a bit more sort of context on the Making Room. So we're a fab lab, a makerspace. We've got place to go to students to see a series of models working, screen printing, mold making, electronics development, plastic recycling, urban agriculture, everything textiles that you could possibly want to make, basically. Over the last few years, we've gone more into sort of sustainability, and as an organisation, we're a community interest company, and we're here to train people in a semi-informal manner, essentially. So we're open to the public for free. People can come in, having never done this sort of stuff before, and just sort of shadow people who've got staff or volunteers, and just either as a hobby or just an interest, or to go into industry, or they start a business, and we've got studio spaces and stuff like that as well. But yeah, as well said, so over the last couple of years we've been more focused around sort of certain repairability with Mike and the project we've been doing with Lancaster. We've got a project with us today that we'll have a go at if you want to, which is basically a broken Game Boy, but broken in very specific ways, so that it's just easier then to sort of teach people how to fix those things if we know exactly how we've been breaking them. And also that you don't have to sort of fix everything at once. You can just fix a little thing, and then you get to a reward of a game of Fluffy Bird and everything else. But yeah, we've just been doing a whole lot more on sort of sustainability, so plastic recycling, there's the precious plastics project, up to 300 hubs worldwide, to decentralise recycling. and sort of finding value in these materials. So you've got a waste material that's either free or paid to be removed, and then you can end up making a product that's more valuable than if you use a virgin material. So for us in Blackburn, for social mobility, that's like a perfect sort of environment to work in. Don't know if that answers the question.
No, it doesn't. It's really interesting hearing about those elements, and actually picking up on that topic as well of like the decentralised approaches to recycling to waste management. I know, Guy, that's something we were talking about before. Would you like to maybe talk a little bit about your work?
Yeah, sure. So precious plastics. When I was still at uni a while ago, then my graduation project was about imagining sort of a mobile, decentralized recycling platform, slightly inspired by precious plastics, because I was intrigued by two things around the theme of recycling, and I'll say another thing on recycling in a second, but the one is the fact that obviously, as you said, those resources are precious, and we have designed a system which is more easily geared towards getting rid of them than towards figuring out how to keep them in circulation. And obviously, there's a lot of waste in that process. But also, and I think that's where the education comes in, when I was doing the project along with another colleague at uni, and our whole approach was, if we can find a way to make recycling approachable and accessible, and make it something that is engaging to people and they would want to get involved with it, with something that's usually sort of hidden behind industry and big sort of apparatus of waste management, which we all know is just basically a big logistics game where nothing eventually ends up where it's supposed to. Can we make something that is about community, about value, and that was the project at uni, and then now I sort of took that over into something that's a bit more, I don't want to say mature, because it's not about losing the sense of playfulness with the original idea, but we took it into a world where we want to find a solution. Right now, the co-founder I'm working with to build this business, about looking at a way that we can regenerate resources that at the moment cannot really be handled by traditional mechanical recycling. Because recycling is a pretty big term that actually involves a lot of different technologies and a lot of different techniques, and most of them can only handle specific types of materials and specific types of outputs as well. Mechanical recycling, the kind that precious plastics have sort of built their whole system around, is very geared to handle specific types of materials and make them into different products of the same or a lower quality from a materials point of view. It doesn't mean that the products themselves are less valuable. If you take bottles and you make them into a lamp, then the lamp is more valuable than the bottle. But from a material science point of view, once you've broken down the material mechanically, it's not as good as the original material. And that process has a limit to how many times you can do that. So there's another category of recycling where you're breaking down the plastics to their raw ingredients. And that is actually very useful if you're targeting plastics that can't be recycled. Plastics that no matter how you break and reheat them, they will not form together again. So we're applying that into areas where there are a lot of those materials, such as, for example, healthcare. So healthcare generates tons of clinical waste, and clinical waste is made up mostly of plastics that are not recyclable at all. And most of them, because of their categorization as hazardous or contagious in some cases, get incinerated. Which means that we're taking a lot of really great resources and we're just burning them away. Sometimes we're burning them for energy, but actually waste to energy is a very, very... it's not as great as we would want it to be. And the decentralization comes in building those systems in a way that we could actually deploy them directly with hospitals. And why that matters is because when part of the problem with waste management, and that goes back to what is amazing about precious plastics, is waste management takes value away from consumers. It takes value away from businesses because it tells you, here's stuff that you don't know what to do with. We know, pay us, we'll take it away and things will be better. But things are not better. And things are not better because waste management, again, is about logistics. It's about moving things around. And globally, only about 9% of plastics actually get recycled. And the reason that it's not financially beneficial to do, because it's cheaper to buy virgin plastics. But it won't always be, because eventually we'll run out and it will become more expensive because it will become a scarce material. So waste management, if we take the power away from it a little bit and we start bringing technology and we start bringing knowledge and understanding into the hands of communities, to people, to businesses, to hospitals, to all sorts of other industries that rely on a lot of materials that unfortunately can't always be handled easily within the process, then we can change and we can shift how we treat resources, because suddenly a hospital will see that it has value in the materials that it produces and exports. And if the hospital can handle them and export higher value materials that could be circulated back into a medical supply chain, for example, because they are equal to virgin materials, then you start generating something that's currently not possible. And you start generating a community and a society that has better responsibility over its own materials and over its own resources, rather than just pay to get them moved away and assume that something good happens. And that's where I think decentralization, terrible word, we really need to find a better, is key, because it's the only thing that can take the veil off of resources and recycling and waste. And there is no waste. A smart man once said that waste is only like, there's no waste, there's just things we don't know what to do with. And there's always something good to do with them. But if we all do it, then it's easier. So that's kind of I think where it links back to both education and the role that it plays. If you educate people that they can take responsibility, they will.
And I think that's really interesting, that is a topic that we all were discussing before. We all brought up in different ways, this role of the designer. So when we're talking about the value of design, maybe we can unpick a bit actually what the role of the designer is in that. So you've described maybe one potential role as a designer that might be someone who can introduce decentralized systems. They might be someone that can introduce new ideas and technologies to improve something. Maybe someone as well that's educating the public. Really interesting start. Maybe we can continue on that theme. Patrick, Mike, would either of you like to pick that up?
Yeah, I think the role of the design has changed and is changing, continually changing. I think what's great about design is it's kind of, it can bring a lot of different things, a lot of different fields and disciplines together. It's kind of a convener, really, a facilitator often. And, you know, in the 20th century, design was very much about capitalism, economics, you know, making things to service companies, to sell stuff, markets, all that kind of stuff. I think we're in a really good spot now. I think, you know, obviously to do with sustainability, climate change, we're at a tipping point. I think in design it's really starting to recognise across both the design research and design practice out in the world how the importance of design as this kind of facilitator of change, as a change agent. And I think for young designers, that's what you really should be thinking about your role is. You know, you're there to make a change and transform, and move away from just making things to sell them effectively, and whatever that is, a product, a service, a system. And yeah, I think that's where, you know, design is, particularly sustainability and all the things you've been talking about. And in terms of education, I think, you know, what you were talking about in terms of decentralisation chimes a lot with the work that we've been doing. This idea of taking power back, those power dynamics and the economics of kind of, you know, there's these big companies, waste management companies, who are, you know, controlling a lot of things. And what we need to do is, with the stuff that we've been doing, is thinking about repair, reuse, recovery, under that banner of recycling. It's quite a broad banner, I guess. But, you know, we're trying to start to educate people in, you know, local communities as well, about these things. I think it's really important.
Well, Patrick. Well, thanks for bringing it back to education again. Which is what I feel most comfortable with. What I forgot to add when I introduced myself very briefly in the beginning is I'm a professor of communication design, so graphic design, visual communication, this kind of thing. We're talking a lot about product design here. And I remember when I've been teaching in Germany. Actually, I'll give you a bit of context. I was approached 15 years ago and asked if I'd like to become a professor of communication design. At the time in my life when I was completely and utterly fed up with graphic design and communication design. But also I had no idea where Stuttgart was. And I started to ask around and like, oh God, Stuttgart's the unsexiest, most boring city in Germany. Don't do it. But I went down there and I fell to give a talk. Somebody convinced me into doing it, to give a talk. And I fell in love with the campus because it's a very old school university campus with the fine art building here, department here, the industrial design and architecture building here, and communication design here, plus textile design, ceramic design, etc., etc., etc. So very unlike the Central St Martin's and the Royal College of Art in London where I studied. And I just loved the idea of the possibilities of interdepartmental collaboration for a start, which was something that I had very, very little opportunities to do while I was a student. I'm going to have to like simplify a bit now. But anyway, I ended up teaching in Stuttgart, and I remember on the first day walking into my class, and I explained a few things, that there were going to be a few changes. Number one, they were very obsessed with poster design. Now, because I'm English, and that whole poster tradition kind of died out generations ago. I explained to them that, I reassured them that I love posters, but I said that we had to kind of diversify slightly. And I spent the last 15 years just really broadening what we're doing in my class. So I say that we specialise in not specialising these days. One of the early conversations I had with the students was about sustainable design, and, environmental responsibility, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was quite shocked that it was just nobody was talking about these conversations weren't happening. So I decided quite early on to start raising environmental awareness, bottom up, as it were. So outside of the classroom situation, we were having conversations in the classroom around production techniques, etc., materials, the impact that basically every design decision that you make has an impact on the environment, everything, to a greater or lesser extent. And I've spent the last decade or so doing non-curricular stuff. And the one project I wanted to talk about a little bit today, just for the sake of simplifying everything, was 3 weeks ago to celebrate World Earth Day. I thought it'd be really cool to shut down the academy. So I told my boss that we were going to shut down the academy. I threatened to pull the main power supply plug. I'm like, we're that serious about it. And I got everybody I put the word out, told everyone we're going to do this amazing thing, and then there's just like silence for a couple of weeks. Then one by one, then I started like applying a bit of pressure on people, which is something that I didn't want to do. I wanted it to come from within, but I managed to get my class on board. And then suddenly we had like 4 or 5 projects, and I was saying it's okay, the scale of the project. It can be an eco-action, so you can do a clothing exchange thing that we all love doing. That's completely fine. It could be as simple as just making a little statement and handwriting on a piece of paper and putting it in a visible place. And some really cool projects started coming in. A woman contacted me and said, I want to do a gig in a toilet. Can I do this? I'm like, yeah, this is absolutely brilliant. I don't know how it fits in with World Earth Day. She's like, well, it's going to be completely acoustic, unplugged, blah, blah, blah. And we had, of course, we planted the symbolic tree, and we hugged trees. There was a healthy amount of absurdity embedded into the day. That was something that I really wanted. I wanted it to be fun, but at the same time very serious. There was a very serious message behind everything. But I knew that to get the students on board, it had to be an enjoyable thing. And then things started to kind of escalate slightly. The day arrived, and I think on the day we had like 86 projects, so we managed to shut it down. Somebody from the Ministry of the Environment, locally, well, German politics, I won't explain the whole thing, but the local region turned up on the day with an old T-shirt and a book for the book exchange and the clothing exchange. And he's since been in touch again, asking me if I'd like to coordinate it. So we're going to form a network between all of the universities in the south of Germany to try and do something simultaneously on Earth Day next year. But it all kind of grew out of this idea of, I teach in a very collaborative way. Yeah, I'm not like, I don't transmit or hand over sacred knowledge to the students who behave the best. It's not about that. That's not my approach to it. It's a dialogue. It's a very open dialogue, and we kind of define the projects that we should be working on together. And I feel that my role is not to tell people what to do. I think that's probably why we're in so much trouble these days in education, actually, because we've been kind of just explaining, making out that we understand everything that's going on. I'm as lost and as concerned as everybody in this room at this stage. But my approach is quite instinctively to try and keep if I see projects that are kind of going off course, then I'll try and pull them back on, not into line again, but it's about discovering things for ourselves and trying to kind of reimagine how we could be teaching and learning together. I don't know what. Does that somehow relate to the question?
It does, and I think that's there's some really interesting things that come out of that. So one of the things I picked up on, which is something I think we've also found in our own work, is about the lack of conversations about sustainability that are happening. And me and Mike before went to the Blue Dot Festival and Tom, and we were talking with the public about the right to repair legislation. Pretty much none of them anyone had heard of it. And it's that was something, that was actually quite shocking because it's something that's about consumer rights. And again here, for those that don't know, the right to repair legislation is the legislation for the government which means that manufacturers have to make things repairable. So they have to make component parts available to people, they have to make things repairable, but it only applies to a very limited amount of things. So in people's homes, it seems like the white goods, so like washing machines and fridges, things like that. But it doesn't apply to lots of digital devices like IoT devices. And we were just sort of, shocked about that, surprising how little people knew about it. And then it's unpicking that, well, why don't people know about that? And whose responsibility is that to share that information? So I think, you as an educator, Patrick, have been doing that, having those conversations with people about what sustainability is, what is environmental responsibility. And actually this power of collective action and what that can achieve. And I think that's a really interesting message to come from that, about something from this small idea and what's been built from that. And all these different ways that people understand and interpret what climate change and what environmental responsibility is. I love the idea of someone doing a show in a toilet, because they're thinking about acoustics and not using electricity. Then that's really interesting. And the idea of embedding serious fun. So I think that's something really interesting from a lot of these sorts of projects. So Guy, you talked about that as well, about not taking the sort of joy and fun out of what you're producing. And even though you've taken maybe in a slightly different direction, as you called it, more mature as a project, it's still got those underlying qualities about it. And I know Tom, with the work that we've been working with you on, the replay, the gaming device, again, it's a serious topic because we're teaching people about how to repair, but that underlying fun and joy, I think, is a really important element. Even more than that, though, I really liked, Patrick, how you summarised it about what your role was as an educator and as a designer. So not telling people, but working with them is sort of co-discovery. And I think maybe we can unpick that more. So Guy, we were chatting before about this idea of where does design fit in when you're working with people. So it might be as an educator, it might be working with someone in a company, and Mike, you already mentioned these things like conveyor, facilitator. I think those are really interesting terms. But where does design fit into that process? I don't know if anyone would like to pick up on that.
I can well, I can pick up on where we were talking earlier, because I think to your point, design is shifting into the point where design has more focus on sustainability and on positive impact and not just on pure economics. However, I think we have a bit of an issue at the moment because the industry has not made that shift. The industry still sees, and it's funny with design, like design in a discipline that is barely defined for 100 years, and it's been mostly defined, like you say, by commercial drivers, but it also means that the industry has gotten accustomed to seeing design as something that you bring in, you patch it in when your business is ready to have design in it. You develop a business, you build something, a brand, a product, whatever, and then you bring in designers so they can make it better or make it nicer. And I think that's where design at the moment falls short. Designers have also, in a way, gotten accustomed to being called upon to serve design for its own sake. And I think where design needs to shift next, which also comes with an industry shift that needs to happen, is to understand that design is not a patch-in. Design is not an add-on to the process. Design needs to be an inherent part of the process from its very, very, very early beginning, and it needs to be there throughout the whole way. I think designers also need to become something else than what they have. I think, to your point, much more multidisciplinary than they used to be. Like, actually, they used to be multidisciplinary because all of the early designers were people coming from vast amounts of disciplines, architects that were painters and furniture makers and like everything that we used to know about designers was because they came from a very multidisciplinary approach, which also allowed them to take a much more cross-section of how they view the world and what solutions do they offer for it. And then we've started subcategorizing it. So I'm a graphic designer, or I'm a product designer, or I'm an industrial designer. And obviously the term product design has been taken away from industrial designers because it's now become about digital products. So now you tell people, I'm a product designer, they're like, oh yeah, so what websites do you make? I'm like, no. Sorry, it's not a product. But it is. But so I think designers need to get into the point where designers can start offering their work as if it's the very basic building block that you need to make something good. Because I think it is. I think people started having this thing with design thinking. Right now everybody straps design thinking on something. They're like, oh, we're gonna do design thinking workshops. And I was, in my incubator, building my startup, we had a design thinking workshop, and the lady who was running it was like, oh, you'll like this. And I'm like, I must tell you, we don't do design thinking. We just do design. Like, everything that you're saying are things that I do not think about. They are part of my practice. I don't do double diamond charts. I just do the process. So that's the thing. Design has become an add-on. It's like, oh, now we'll bring the designers in. And that needs to change. And I think design agencies and design studios need to start offering their services on a much wider level and in a much earlier stage. They need to start being able to integrate themselves into the development of businesses and products and brands right from the beginning, so they can actually be part of the decision-making process. Because we're consultants now. Clients come to us and we give them our advice and we design, and then they do whatever they want. And that's a lot gets missed along the way. And if we become much more immersed in the process, and we as designers become much more understanding of not just doing design work, but doing everything else, understanding business, understanding sustainability at a much deeper level than we do right now, understanding that greenwashing is where most sustainability is at the moment. Like, a lot of businesses take supposedly sustainable approaches, but it's because they don't actually consider the implications. They don't consider the double-edged sword of making decisions that actually many times have the very, very adverse effects. There was one thing, sorry, I know I talk way too much, but one last sentence. There was something I always remember about, we were doing a project like way back to try and reduce the carbon footprint of, reduce the environmental impact of packaging for a company. And we started looking at paper pulp as an alternative to plastic packaging, which is great, right? Like, it's paper. But the amount of water that you use to make paper pulp packaging is massive. And actually, the carbon footprint of making paper pulp packaging is much higher than making the plastic equivalent in some cases. So the questions often is, how do you evaluate? What is the focus? What is the main thing that you're trying to improve? What is the main thing that you're trying to get to? And often the question won't be the thing that you think you are, because it may be that the effect that you're trying to achieve comes from a different place than the one you're measuring. But designers are limited by too narrow a lens of what they're hired to do, so they often can't make deep enough decisions that consider all of those things. And I think that's what needs to change about how design approaches that.
I think that's really interesting. And it's really complex actually when you start to think about it, like what the role of designers are, what design is considered to be. I think often there is an association whether it's about making stuff, but it doesn't need to be about making anything. It could be about the processes of how you've coordinated a workshop can be designed. So it becomes so broad. I think also the labelling that happens when we call ourselves designers, but then lots of people are engaged in design activities that don't necessarily call ourselves designers. Like Tom, I don't know if you refer to yourself as a designer, but I would consider the work you do to be designing from how you approach people, from how you engage the community. They're all things that are very in line with many of the principles that we do as designers, particularly like participatory design, and how we look at sustainability. So I think that's really interesting, how we label ourselves as well. And Guy, you touched upon that with saying about what product design is now considered to be and what people expect when you give yourself that title. So there is this sort of transition that we're going through, and obviously the whole design thinking that we won't get into.
It's a bad word.
Would anyone else like to maybe comment about the role of designers? And it could be drawing from your own experiences as this, or the role of not being a designer, Tom, as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in terms of the paper pulp side of things. Something that seems like it's going to be more environmentally friendly. Oh, that's nice. And you think, well, that's probably been grown as a monoculture and completely destroyed like swamplands or forest or prairie lands. And all that carbon's just going to go straight back into the atmosphere when that degrades anyway. So
it's also a disposable thing, and it's going to go into landfill anyway.
So it's either So but it seems like it just naturally seems like the more sustainable thing or the more environmentally friendly. But you've got to drill down further and like I said, analyze it.
Yeah, we don't get the opportunity, right? You often don't get the chance to drill down as much as you need to make sure that you make the right decision. You get a very limited chance.
Because the company will say,
yeah,
it's paper packaging, it's great.
Yeah.
And it's, where's that information? It's like, who's telling us about that? Like, who is educating the public about what that means, and who's providing that the statistics, that data that accompany that packaging in terms of like how much carbon was used to produce this packaging, this product, like what's the end of life plan for this product. I think all of those things are really difficult, and so on like a community level, like that's something that you talk about, the people that visit the making rooms, and with the work with precious plastics, it's what you can do with the end of life of something so it doesn't end up in landfill. I think that that's all part of this, like under the broad heading of the role of the designer, but the role of like what design can do for communities as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's never going to be some of the elements that we touch on in the lab are never going to be sort of moving the needle in terms of the amount of waste that's being processed, but the amount of people that get to sort of think about things differently and get to experience that. You know, we've got a farming robot, and we're not going to be a lettuce producer, but we get people having a go and thinking about agriculture and technology. Same with the precious plastics. You know, like you say, those processes aren't perfect, and then it's not the answer to this. It's not sort of the solution, but it's a sort of a point of education, and it's a stopgap to solve part of the problem for a while until we can actually sort of get enough people knowing about this because of these sort of imperfect processes, so that we then have people developing more perfect processes.
That was a really interesting point what you just said, because I think I recently, I don't remember I was reading someone who was talking about how do we like approach such massive problems like carbon footprint and waste and so on. Like we come to the conclusion that we need like a massive solution that will change everything, and actually like the only way that we can make a dent in our pathway to doom is by having millions of people making very small changes. Like doing very imperfect solutions that solve a very limited amount, but they make a small dent. And enough small dents, you will make an impact.
Yeah, if we wait for perfect, we're not going to get there.
No, we're never going to get it, because also the industry can't be bothered. So we can't wait for a perfect solution. It won't come. But small solutions that solve a little bit of the problem with enough community power and enough empowerment back away from purely commercial decision making, that will make a difference.
Yeah, and it was like you were saying before about that in terms of when we went to Blue Dot Festival and spoke to people about right to repair. It's somewhat not surprising that we have so few rights to do with repair, because people don't know about it. Why would you have rights why would they give you rights if you're not going to know about them, kind of thing. So you know, these activities allow just to have those conversations, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that this sort of idea of community empowerment is really interesting. I think that's where a lot of design is aiming at. So Mike, I know a lot of your work is aiming to have impact within communities.
Yeah, well, working with you guys, isn't it? Well, yeah, you know, especially Tom, he's so engaged with the community in Blackburn and then the wider Fab Lab community network and things like that. But yeah, I think it's about raising awareness, changing perceptions, opening up the hood, so to speak, of a lot of these systems and products and things that we engage with, you know, day to day, that we don't really think about their sustainable impact, because they've been designed to not let you think about them in a way. You know, they're very closed, and they kind of hide all the problems. So stuff with like the stuff we've been doing on like technology, smart tech, you know, internet connected technologies, you know, stuff like smartphones and laptops and Internet of Things devices, connected devices, smart devices. They're all designed to, you know, not let you repair them, because they obviously want you to buy a new one, and they use that double sort of dual approach of, you know, the hardware can break after a certain amount of time. We know that from things like washing machines, white goods over the years. They can, you know, degrade and break the mechanical aspect, but also the software increasingly, you know, what we talked about with digital as well. The software obsolescence, digital obsolescence is increasingly becoming a problem, because we're so ensconced in digital, the layer of code that exists across our society and the communities these days. You know, everything's hooked up, and that is also creating issues around sustainability. And just like you talked about the paper pulp having those ripple effects and those trade-offs, you know, you can think, we can do it this way, it's better. Digital, a lot of the work we've been doing, digital, you know, is often seen as having less impact, but it's all powered by,
They have those
server farms using energy, using water to cool them, because they obviously, you know, this is lots of computers and processors all running at the same time. Cloud computing, the impacts are becoming huge, and we don't really think about the way that we're, you know, when you send an email or you send a WhatsApp, you're actually creating carbon emissions, and that's all adding to our, you know, the global climate change. You're heating the earth with So
When you're scrolling on TikTok.
yeah, you know, watching a stream, I don't know, Bridgerton, something like that on Netflix.
Each nonsense.
Very, very
chat.
specific.
New seasons out, new seasons out. Yeah, but I think, yeah, and sort of getting, in terms of trying to get into, you know, speak to communities, and it's about changing perceptions of these things that, you know, we don't normally think about because we're so, you know, everyone's busy, you've got work, got life, got family, and it's easier to sometimes just put your head down and get on with things, but
yeah, what's nice about the sort of the distributed, decentralised approach is that, you know, transmitting those ideas to other spaces doesn't take too much carbon. And so if we come up with an idea that resonates with the community, which will moves the needle, then we can pass that on to all the other ones. It reminds me of, I think it's the Mayor of Barcelona, but it's under the Fab City project. There's 52 Fab cities in the world. The idea that the only things that should move between cities are ideas and people. Which is obviously a very high bar to get.
Very extreme.
Yeah, it's, but that'll be an amazing world to live in, where we don't actually need to move all this stuff around.
Generally, I think like going back to like a city-state system would be like a great thing. Like just kind of take it all back down, locality,
Just
you
chill.
know, just chill. Was there?
sorry,
Yeah,
Ethan, you were
like-
going to ask a question.
I had a question about like what you were talking about product design and like right to repair stuff. I think a lot of the time like the way big companies approach right to repair is, oh, this means we've got too many SKUs, we need to make one universal device that connects to everything, that does everything. But then that, I feel like that just then ends up making more crap that then can't be repaired, that then can't be solved, and it's just another closed system. Like, what's your view on this like idea of this one universal device idea approach?
It's very. I'll tell you one thing. Apple should definitely give up on their own connector. Like that's for sure. Like USB-C is definitely a superior connector. But it's standardization is an important thing to have. We need it as a society, but we also need to be flexible about it. Let me start by saying that we should give up on the imperial measurement system, first of all. That will help, because metric is real, and that will be an important part. But the thing is that there are universal truths in a way. Metric is actually based on nature, like it's not invented. It's not like, ooh, here's a foot. And there are things like that, like there are things that make sense, and you can make them in a way that it would make sense. Like, why do we have different power sockets everywhere? What? There's no logic behind that. Why do we have different power, voltages and different, like...
Trains that can't go between.
Yeah, trains that, like... Why are the size of train tracks are based on, like Roman legion horse carts. Like, there are things that are, like, have become such absolute truths that we build everything around them, and that makes sense, that's fine, as long as that system can be adaptable. As long as we can get to the point that we can say, there is one thing that makes sense for everything, but it can be updated if it needs to be. But if you need to update 1,000 different things that serve 1,000 different purposes that are actually all the same purpose, like running electricity through the walls, then you're just making life harder for you, for everyone, for the industry, for the amounts of materials that you need. So I think there is a point to make on universal and standards, because they are important, because they allow us also. I just saw something yesterday about someone, you know, that the measurement systems for air quality are widely different in different countries. Widely different. And if you see it on a chart, you will see that what qualifies as horrible air quality in the States is pretty decent in India as air quality. But it's not, obviously. It's just what people accept. Like, here they accept that the air is shittier, and there they don't. Like, because in California they would not accept shitty air quality. So standardization is important, but it needs to be flexible. It needs to be adaptable because we need to be able to shift it over time. But I think we still need to be able to share some more common ideas, and it will help. And yeah, USB-C for sure.
But also it not being used as a scapegoat. And I think that's
Yes.
like part of it, this is part of the issue. We have greenwashing where companies are saying we're using like universal standardized like components, etc., which can be really great, but if they don't make it actually possible for you to open up a device to change those components, it's sort of highly irrelevant.
Yeah.
Now we are at the point where we do need to like close up, so I maybe can ask of the audience if there's any final like questions that you've got. Obviously we'll still be around afterwards as well if you want to have a chat with any of us. And if yeah, go for it.
Sorry. I think with big change, there's obviously going to be like big waste as well. So if you change all the charging ports in USB-C, then 1 million lightning chargers get chucked in the bin. Like, how do you balance that kind of innate waste that comes with change? You know.
Well, they don't have to be chucked. They can be responsibly collected. That's a different problem. And electronics waste and the approach to electronics waste will change. There's going to be, from 2026, there's going to be a law in the UK, which should start tomorrow or yesterday, but that all electronics distributors will be forced to allow and enable free electronics waste collection. The amount of gold that we all have sitting in our homes, not serving a purpose, is massive. So, yes, change requires a shift in resources. You're going to have to give up some things and reuse them somewhere else in order to change, but you still need to make that change. And I think the only thing is we need to be able to make that change responsibly. There's a company I know who, they're called material index. What they do is they index what materials in a building could be reclaimed when it's going for demolition, and then sell those materials forward. And because tons of construction materials go to waste when buildings get demolished because no one has actually gone in and thought of how to take them back. So you will always generate byproducts. I won't say waste. You will always generate byproducts because everything in nature generates byproducts as well. But nature consumes all its byproducts back. We don't. We just chuck them to India and say they got recycled just because they got baled and put on a ship. So yes, you're right. Changing all the connectors to USB-C will produce some waste. But it's important because we need to make that change. We need to force Apple to not make things that only work with Apple things. I had a question actually.
Just on the point, I think that waste would have existed anyway because people would
Yeah.
have got the new phone and
Yeah.
got the new charger with
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
anyway
Yeah,
as well.
you'd get to that point eventually anyway. It's just a question of can you get to that point with a more controlled measure? And I think that's possible. But you need to obviously force Apple to do things that they don't have to do.
I think you know, and you talked about shipping to like different countries, you know, global south countries. There's actually economies around waste in those countries. So, you know, obviously it's wrong that we do that, and we say we tick it off. You know, the UK's lowered its emissions, it's lowered its e-waste, and all, you know, the stuff that's going to landfill over here or whatever, we shipped it to another country, pretend it's all off our books basically.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of countries do, you know, westernised countries. But there are the offset or the sort of the sort of thing that comes from that is there are, you know, there are economies around scavenging and reuse of waste in those countries. Obviously, there's pollution and there's hazardous, you know, to human health, to biodiversity, to everything over there.
It's that sort of analysis, like of the overview of it, because
Yeah.
if you take China, for example, we used to ship our waste to China,
National sword.
and they realised that while some companies were doing well and sort of using new materials, the amount of health implications for the country to process this, it wasn't a net gain. They weren't making money out of it, and so that's why they've stopped. And it's just a case of the people that accept that waste and make those decisions for the country are the people associated with the positive, the upsides of that process, and not necessarily the downside.
Yeah,
you're right, those economies are important, by the way, and they serve an important purpose, but they are eventually executed in a way that is horrible from a society point of view.
Yeah.
And I think if they were, there's a company now that's, where is it? I don't remember. But they are now basically doing a thing where they are sort of officializing waste scavengers. I don't remember in which country. So they're giving them like uniforms and basically making them employees so they can actually get a salary and like health benefits and things like that. They're doing the same job, but they're doing it in a way that makes it reasonable, like makes it okay.
So it puts a greenwash across it, and it's morally and ethically wrong for us to be, shipping our stuff over there. There's no doubt about that. I'm not condoning that in any way. I think. But to speak to Ethan's question about this idea of what do we do, I think it's really difficult. It's a wicked problem, as they say. It's systemic. It's really deep, and we're always going to be in what some people use this term accretion space, where we always have old tech, old things. New stuff's coming out. We're never going to, we all know we all might use, cassette players or whatever. These things still exist in our world. So it's not. I don't think there is a kind of like, there's just going to be that switch off point where we're like, oh, we're going to just. So everyone's just going to shift to a new thing because, you were talking about this idea like different countries have different kind of plug sockets and things like that. That's because there's different cultures, different beliefs, different values, geopolitics. There's all sorts of difficult things that exist, and as we know in this world, there's a lot of different people, and not everyone sort of agrees on everything. So it's, I think it's difficult. It's going to be difficult. Well, that transition's got to come because we're reaching planetary boundaries. We know this. Companies are going to be forced to do it. Government legislation needs to do that. But I think it will be a transition. It won't be a kind of a quick one-size-fits-all change.
Yeah, definitely.
It's about what's realistic as well. Like, people are going to want more stuff. Okay, that's just a given. So how do we make sure that we design those things in a way where that's feasible to do?
Patrick, did you want to share?
Well, because we should be kind of wrapping things up, shouldn't we?
Should be.
That's what we
You
were
can
asking.
ask you a question before you share what you
It's
want to
fine.
share.
Okay. I wanted to just tell you a funny little story, because there's a happy ending to this story. And it's very simple, and it's a bit hippy-dippy, but it's beautiful. I'm a partner in a business in Los Angeles, which is it's an art gallery space with a cafe shop integrated into it. And it's in a kind of pretty rough area, mid-city LA, I don't know if people know it. And I was approached by this English guy, coincidentally, during lockdown. He said, do you want to work on this thing? And I'm like, oh, God, no. It's going to mean flying over to LA and stuff. And I don't know.
So naturally you said yes.
Well, he kind of he's the most charming guy. He's a very smart guy, and he kind of charmed me into doing it. We've since then become very good friends. But I think one of the jobs, we haven't really talked about this too much. We've touched on it, but I think one of the jobs when you all graduate, especially in, well, no, I think in any form of design actually, is that you're going to have to work hard educating your clients as well. And making them aware of things, yeah? Okay, so in the case of the LA client, he's a dude who's interested in selling art and coffee, and he doesn't know too much about packaging. So we had this insane conversation about the cups. I said, look, I'll only get involved if you do it my way, okay? And that means reusable cups. Or people bring their own cups, they get like a discount. He kind of looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, what are you talking? Like I was, literally from a different planet. And I said, well, it's California. I mean, you should be driving these things. You should be world leaders in reusability and biodegradable, all of this stuff. And he just kept looking at me like I'm insane. So I then embarked on a kind of very long and not particularly fruitful mission to find reusable cup suppliers in the States. We're still working on it. We've got a couple of hundred. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I mean, this is California, yeah. each time I'm like, Ben, we're not making any progress. I don't know if I can keep working. I don't know if I can stick with the program. We've got to kind of find something. I can export things from Europe again. It's kind of insane to do this. But in Germany, well, in Berlin, there are laws that if you're running a coffee shop, you have to be able to offer your clients reusable cups for a start. And in the end, he came back to me. This is the really happy end. It's not an ending. It's like a beginning, actually. But it's such a beautiful story. He came back to me and said, Patrick, as you know, we're having big problems here. I've bought a pottery wheel, a spinning wheel. and I'm like, Ben, this is. Do you know anything about pot? Have you ever done? He's like, no, I do like a night class and stuff, and I'm going to make my own pot. So if you go to Harmgrove Social in mid-city now, you will be offered a cup that is thrown by the owner of the business. And they're really good. And he's discovered that he's got this sort of natural pocket in town to make them. And it's just the most beautiful thing. It's a story. I gave a talk at Pentagram a few weeks ago, and I kind of ended on this story as well, because it's just such a beautiful message, isn't it? And we've I don't take the credit for that, but because I was trying to kind of explain to him that I didn't want to do it in a certain way. He just very, very cleverly, in a very inspired way, came back with that solution. And it's given me a lot of hope, actually, for the future. So try to get as closely with your clients, or the people who make the decisions as possible, and then work really hard to educate them. You know, it's not their fault. They're really good at doing their thing, and why should they be experts in the kind of thing that we should know about? You've got to get there together.
You're like a grain of sand in an oyster shell when you've made a kernel out of that.
There you go.
And that's what we do with clients. And so
There you go.
Just be a little bit annoying about
Yeah.
things that you care about.
More than a bit.
A bit, yeah.
And I think that is actually a fantastic point to end on. So I'd just like to thank, first of all, for being such an attentive audience, but yeah, all of the panellists for their really interesting discussions. So